Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
This show is brought to you by Audible. They are the leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. You know I'm a huge Audible fan because you can listen to audiobooks whenever and wherever you want. Whether you're at the beach, the gym, or stuck in traffic, there's nothing quite like Audible. Go to audiblepodcast.com/Lutz and sign up today. You are listening to the FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. I'm Kerry Lutz on 1230 WBZT. Well, obviously the economy these past 5 years has been kind of down the drain, and the result has been increased poverty, even in the face of claims that the economy is recovering, although we all know that these claims, well, the claims are at times specious and questionable. Here to talk about the poverty landscape is an expert, Stephen Pimpare. He's written a book about it. Stephen, welcome to the Financial Survival Network.
Thank you, Terry. Glad to be here.
Hey, so you wrote A People's History of Poverty in America, and one thing that's been pretty consistent since the founding of America way back when is that we've had poor people, right?
Sure, not just us, but yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we can sort of argue about the extent to which that's fluctuated over time. But, there has always been a segment of the population that has experienced identifiable material need, right? Not enough food, not access to shelter, not access to basic needs. And then the other way that people sometimes think about poverty is that there has always been a distance between categories of people based on access that they have. And this is one way to think about sort of the difficulty in actually defining what it is that we mean when we are talking about poverty, right? Are we talking about some sort of absolute level of minimal survival subsistence, or are we talking about some sort of relational position, right? Are we talking about how well people are doing in comparison to others? And depending on sort of the ways in which you think about that, you can tell different kinds of stories about where we've been over time.
Right. And the pool of poor people isn't a static pool. Some people are becoming poor, other people are leaving that pool, right?
Absolutely. That's a really important point, I think. If we look at the official Census Bureau data, which came out last week, right, and that by that measure, which pretty much everybody agrees is deeply flawed in a number of different kinds of ways, but it has the virtue of being consistently flawed, so we have data that are at least comparable going back to the late 1950s. At any rate, that told us last week that the official poverty rate in the U.S. in 2012 was 15%, about 46 million Americans living below the official threshold. That's about $23,000 a year for a family of four. But that's a static measure, right? That tells us essentially how many people were poor during the time of the survey. But one of the things that we know, as you referred to, is that people move in and out of poverty over time. So one of the things that we can do, using the Census Bureau's own data, is we can step back a bit and look at a longer period of time. So, for example, if we look at from 2009 to 2011, that entire 3-year period, one of the things that we find is that if we ask how many Americans had an experience of poverty, of falling below that threshold, for a 2-month period or more, we're talking about 32% of the public, not 15%, right? About twice as many Americans have an experience of poverty as those numbers reflect, but those experiences tend to be relatively short-lived. I mean, in some ways, sort of the story, not just of the current moment or even of the last decade, but arguably of the last 3 or 4 decades, has been growing insecurity, right? Growing numbers of families who are sitting right on that edge and just getting by maybe, but one kind of crisis or another away from slipping into poverty. Most don't experience that over a long period of time, right? So that 3-year period from 2009 to 2011, 32% poor for 2 months or more. Only 3.5% are actually poor for that entire period. So I think in that way, poverty looks different than I think a lot of Americans think it looks.
Right. And then there's the issue of homelessness. Now, if you look in New York City, a large portion of the homeless, and we don't know exactly what portion, are have mental problems, drug addicted, alcoholic. Large percentage, perhaps not as large as it once was, but certainly the overwhelming majority have those problems. And really, no matter how much money you would give them or what programs are available, those are really intractable problems that are difficult to cure over the short run or the long run.
Well, I mean, it's not a majority at this point in time. In fact, the majority of folks in the shelter system in New York City, which is over 50,000 people at this point in time, actually majorities are families with children now. It's the largest segment of the homeless population. You're absolutely right, however, that some non-trivial number, and you're also right to point out that these are wind up being fairly sketchy data, but some absolutely non-trivial number of particularly single men who are homeless, have histories of alcohol and drug abuse, have histories of untreated mental illness. A fairly large number of them wind up being veterans of American foreign wars with undiagnosed and untreated mental illnesses, including post-traumatic stress disorders. I would push back, however, on the notion that those are intractable kinds of problems. We, in fact, have pretty good knowledge about what tend to be the most effective kinds of, say, drug and alcohol treatment programs. They tend to be expensive to operate, and there are nowhere near enough slots in those kinds of programs that are available for the folks who might benefit from them. And very often sort of folks have to move through those kinds of programs a number of times before they wind up having long-term successes. But not intractable, but very, very difficult to confront.
Difficult, and our ability to do something about it has been limited, and we've been unsuccessful at dealing with the problem for the reasons that you've stated, for sure. No question.
I mean, so some of it is just funding, right? I mean, if we were to magically snap our fingers and have suddenly enough treatment spaces available in the entire United States of America, both for drug and alcohol addiction and for different kinds of mental health services, for everyone who wanted such a slot, we could make some really serious positive impact. Again, that would be really expensive if we were going to do that, but we could absolutely do it.
Yeah, and we can go back to the 70s and 80s when the state mental hospitals in New York and around the country basically were emptied out as a cost-saving measure and as a civil rights measure, where involuntary confinement was basically ruled by the courts to be a violation of one's civil rights, and those people were basically dumped onto the streets. Supposedly there was going to be an infrastructure to care for them. Infrastructure, halfway houses, never emerged. Basically they were pretty much dumped onto the streets to fend for themselves, and probably that was more inhumane than the involuntary confinement. That led to thousands of homeless people on the streets of America as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's actually the process even started earlier, sort of into the mid and late 1960s, but that sort of deinstitutionalization process, as you suggested, there was a logic to it. I think some of it holds up, some of it maybe not so well. But that logic only holds so long as there were then those outpatient ancillary kinds of support services that were going to step in to make up for the institutional confinement. And of course, that didn't materialize, and in lots of ways has gotten worse over time. So it's again, it's this sort of real lack of institutional support that could probably not end the problem. I think that's an unrealistic expectation, but certainly have enormously large positive impacts on it. But again, we've got, a lack of political commitment, among other things, for those kinds of expenditures.
Yeah, well, some of the SRO type facilities materialized in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they were successful. But the problem was that people got released before they even had a chance really to think about creating these places. And, it required a massive commitment that just wasn't there when the releases took place. And all of a sudden it was, oh my God, where did all these disturbed people come from? And I don't think society was quite prepared to deal with the fallout.
Yeah, I mean, if you look today, sort of at the what we have by way of sort of research about most effective interventions, specifically for homelessness, they tend to be integrated supportive housing first kinds of programs, right? So you identify, first thing you do, you identify homelessness as principally a problem of housing, but then for each person who you then find housing for, identify the broad range of ancillary supports that are necessary for them to be able to maintain stable housing over the long term of their lives. And those programs that wind up doing them well wind up having this extraordinary complex array of support services built in to that housing, in recognition that homelessness looks different for different kinds of people, and different kinds of interventions are what's required under certain kinds of circumstances. Again, it's expensive to do that, right? It's effective, not 100% effective, but it's expensive to do that. And neither, right, sort of among Democrats or Republicans, has there seemed to be a commitment among people with the political power to shift around some lines in the budget to engage in that kind of work. So we wind up instead with prisons wind up serving as sort of a repository. If you look at the American prison population, I mean, other than just the sort of the racial imbalance that you identify and the class imbalance, what you find is that entries into the American prison system tend not only to be disproportionately young males of color with less education who are unemployed at the time of their arrest, but increasingly people with undiagnosed and or untreated mental illness. So we wind up, in fact, if you look at the prison population, it's in some ways they're both serving as what used to be insane asylums, and as the population ages, old age homes, right? So they're called upon to function in ways they are absolutely not equipped to function.
Absolutely, and that leads to another problem: is that when you've got these intractable mental problems on the street, you can't force people to take medication. It's almost impossible to get an order forcing them to take medication in a hospital. And it's very difficult to commit people to mental hospitals. Doctors really don't like to get involved in these commitment proceedings. And therefore, the only alternative becomes prison, oftentimes.
I would phrase it slightly differently. I mean, it's not that sort of winds up becoming the only alternative. Is that winds up sort of creating a circumstance in which criminal behavior becomes, I don't want to say inevitable because that doesn't make any sense, but increasingly likely. And again, part of the problem there is that reluctance for involuntary commitment emerges out of some I think, really good instincts, right? I mean, there's a real difficult kind of balance there that you want to strike, right? You don't want to have any agent of the state to too readily and too easily be able to confine someone against their will, right? You would like to have some means of due process in place to ensure that those kinds of systems are not being abused, whether we're talking about folks with mental health issues or whether we're talking about the criminal justice system. But one of the consequences of that is that it does become extraordinarily difficult. And if you've got, it's folks, sort of all along the spectrum of mental illness, that one of the consequences of often effective medical interventions is that as they become successful, right, as sort of people start to feel better, they have a little bit more control over their lives, they start to function more effectively given the the effectiveness of some of the pharmacological interventions we've got today. One of the things that can often happen is people say, oh, great, I'm fine now, I no longer need my medication.
Yeah,
It's that sort of consistent, right, regime of monitoring the medical interventions that is crucially important for that to work over the long term. That's really hard, right? If you've got someone who is not employed or not employed enough to have a traditional home, so they're living off the street, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, really, really messy, difficult stuff. And by the way, since we segued from talking about poverty, we are talking, when all is said and done, a relatively small portion of the population, thankfully, that has an experience of homelessness. Maybe at the outside, over the course of everybody's lives, maybe 14% of the population will have an experience of homelessness at one point or another, most of them very brief. By contrast, about 65% of Americans over the course of their adult lives will have an experience of poverty.
Exactly, and we're going to talk more about this on the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. We're speaking with Stephen Pimpare, and he's the author of A People's History of Poverty in America, 1230 WBZT. I want to welcome our new sponsor, Audible. I've been listening to audiobooks from them for over 5 years now. I am a huge Audible fan. In fact, I've bought multiple Platinum memberships. Platinum membership, you buy 25 audiobooks at a time. I just got done listening to the first 3 or 4 books of the Jack Reacher series, the one you probably saw, or maybe you didn't, in the theater, Tom Cruise movie. I mean, just a wonderful book, wonderful series, expertly narrated, and so many times I'm in the car, I get sick of listening to music or news or the radio. I just put my iPod on, plays the book, and makes that trip go by so quickly. To me, this is one of the great things of the information revolution of the internet, is that you can get over 100,000 books on your iPad or iPod or iPhone instantly. Another thing that they have is courses on Audible, the Modern Scholar series. And I've listened to lectures about World War I, Shakespeare, nanotechnology, detective novels. It's so enlightening. To me, Audible is a must-have killer app for the iPhone, the iPad, for my computer, wherever I am. I'm always downloading these books. Like I say, they're a sponsor, so check them out. They've got a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial membership. Just sign up at www.audiblepodcast.com/Lutz, L-U-T-Z. Again, audiblepodcast.com/Lutz. Sign up today. Like I say, this to me is a dream sponsor. These are exactly the types of things that I like to pass on to you because I'm such a fanatical, over-the-top Audible user. 5-6 years I've been listening, hundreds of books. I used to think I was a well-read person, and it's a little strange when somebody asks you, did you read that book? And you have to say, well, somebody actually read it to me, but they actually did a better job than I could have, so I don't mind it. But my friend Sean Perger up in Vancouver, he listens to almost as many as I do, and he can't get enough. I know you're going to love this company, love their service. I do. So check them out. audiblepodcast.com/Lutz. And we're back. We're with Stephen Pimpare. I'm Kerry Lutz on the Financial Survival Network, 1230 WBZT. So, Stephen, I'd like to get into this issue of food stamps, EBT cards, etc. During the current occupant of the White House, food stamp recipients have gone from 32 million Americans receiving it in January of 2009 now to close to 50 million. And during that time, 7.2 million Americans, you're looking at about 18 million Americans getting EBT cards, 7.2 million Americans getting jobs during that time. So obviously, the benefits going out from the government have increased far more than the job market. And then we've got stories starting to come out that able-bodied people who can get jobs are available, opt for benefits. And this is kind of an undermining of the work ethic. And people who are working, who are paying ever larger amounts of their income out in taxes, it's understandable that they get a little upset, especially when they see on the news a guy out in La Jolla. He's a surfer dude, and he's out there with his EBT card getting sushi and lobster. It's a little galling, isn't it?
Well, I mean, here's part of the problem, right? You've got, as you point out, it's a very large program at the moment, in part because whatever effects we might identify to the economic recovery after the Great Recession have by and large been concentrated at the upper end of the income distribution. So that when we actually look at what's happening with labor markets, recovery there is incredibly slow, right? We've got, 7.3% as an official measure. That's probably closer to 13% if we look at the broader measure. Long-term unemployment, people unemployed for 6 months or longer, still remains at the highest level it's been since the Great Depression itself. So the notion that we inhabit a world of abundant employment, I think, is to be wrong on its face when you just look at sort of the broad data, and those conditions are worse depending on what kind of occupation you're coming out of and what kind of work you live, and of course work depending on where you live. So I mean, I think that's where, for me, point one is to think about those larger kind of economic conditions and to evaluate the extent to which job opportunities genuinely are available. I think the other kind of problem with those kinds of ways of thinking about the program, right, the surfer guy in California, is we've got, it's a program that's spending just shy of $80 billion at the moment. As you say, nearly 50 million Americans on that program. Any program that large and complex, you can find an example of anything that you would like to. That ultimately, as someone who studies policy and someone who tries to identify what the most efficient and effective way is to solve particular kinds of problems, that's not helpful information, right? Because what's relevant is what happens for that larger program, right? How does that large program work? What is the overwhelming majority of recipients? How do we characterize what their experience is? And that is not it, right? I'm not saying that doesn't exist, although I have my own doubts about sort of how that story gets constructed in the way that it tells. But so fine, right? You got some folks here and there who we would identify as abusing the system. There is, to the best of my knowledge, no program, public or private, that operates with a 0% error rate, right? There's always going to be some sort of failure in any kind of complex system, right? What we know about the food stamp program from audits that have been done going back decades and looking at the most recent one of about 2 weeks ago, the overpayment rate for the SNAP program, for the food stamp program, may be about 1.3%, right? Higher than zero, right? And in an ideal world, there would be a zero error rate. We don't live in an ideal world. We live in a very complicated world in which we are trying to offer assistance to, by and large, people who are working or looking for work. We periodically overpay. I'm not too terribly troubled by that.
But in 2008, they dramatically decreased the requirements for that program, and that is in large measure, or at least in substantial part, why the demand for the program has gone up. So,
no, there's not good evidence.
There's good evidence.
There's just not.
Surfer dude and his substrata couldn't be getting food stamps right now if the requirements, the limits on the program were still in place. There's millions of people like Surfer Dude out there who are getting it, able-bodied adults who could be working.
But here's the problem, right, is that the claim that there are millions of guys like Surfer Dude, I would like to see the evidence for that kind of claim. I know that's the myth. I know that's the narrative that gets told. I study this stuff for a living. I am unaware of studies from the public or private sector that suggest that the failure rate is in fact that large.
What about disability? Okay, disability insurance.
So in other words,
lowering the standards.
For the claim you just made about food stamps, so you want to switch over to
no,
disability.
I'm just saying that
make the same claim there.
No, that the programs, when you lower standards, you get more recipients. It's just a way that it works.
Standards having, but what specifically
because
are you referring to when you
used to be that
have been lowered?
The standards in food stamps were lowered in 2008, where able-bodied people could get them single males
let's be
could get
clear
them.
about what the law said, is that the law gave states discretion to waive particular portions of work requirements for principally single men if they evaluated local labor markets to be sufficiently tight that there were not jobs available, or if they were unable to afford to provide job training programs. Those are the circumstances under which states and localities were able to waive those previous requirements. It wasn't arbitrary, and it wasn't it wasn't this sort of big gaping hole in eligibility requirements. It's places where there was no work available and where there weren't job training or job placement programs available, where I would argue it made sense not to require work if there isn't work available. And then, as a consequence, made food stamps available so that people would have.
And that's a loophole you can drive a truck through, because most states just relax the requirements, and it's no coincidence that food stamp use went up 50%. It's no coincidence, because it went up from 32 million to 50 million. That's 50% in my book. 18 million is more than 50%.
Yes, that's a good thing. This is the part you're missing.
That's a good thing.
Food stamps is absolutely
so
good thing.
Dependence on the government is a good thing.
Food stamps is one of the few genuinely counter-cyclical relief programs that we have in existence. Meaning, as the economy declines, it is more responsive right now to increased need than other programs. That has two effects. One human and one economic. The human effect is that people, especially families with children, without either workers in the household or enough income in the household, right? Keep in mind that a third to half of all food stamp households have workers in them, right? They get food. I would argue that's a good thing. If nothing else, I would like to think we should agree that hungry children might have access to food. The second benefit of that counter-cyclical kind of response is economic stimulus, right? There was an analysis done by Moody's Analytics a couple of years ago, right, that looked at the various economic effects of all kinds of different stimulus programs, looking at different kinds of spending programs.
So food stamps create wealth? Is that what you're telling me? Food stamps create wealth.
For every dollar we spend on food stamps, we spend about $1.73 in economic activity.
So let's double it then. Let's give everybody food stamps. It'll be great.
Because 80% of every food stamp check gets spent within 2 weeks. So we've got low-income households. That money goes out. It goes to buy bread, milk, and eggs. It means the people who make the plastic package for the bread, there's a little more jobs there, and the people drive the bread to market. Like, this is in a depressed economy when we're sitting at the lower bound, so there's almost nothing that the Fed can do effectively, and we've got an intransigent Congress that are unable to function. This is one of the few automatic stabilizers that helps keep us from sinking deeper into recession.
So let's just get everybody on them then, and we'll have a booming economy. Since it's
that's a kind of rhetorical response.
Yeah,
right?
but it's
so let's
let's get them up. Let's raise it. Let's raise it to 100 billion. We'll get 20 billion more in economic stimulus, because everyone knows he's only getting 200
of eligible households that don't get food stamps. So I would actually like to.
Yeah, so let's increase it, and the economy will go up. But you can't generate. So you believe that poverty is a political problem, and it's not an economic problem.
It's a combination of both, but we can look around at the world, and every rich democracy other than the United States has a lower poverty rate, a lower child poverty rate, a lower elderly poverty rate than we do. Right? There are means by which advanced, functioning, capitalist, free market, integrated economies can, in fact, both thrive and reduce poverty beyond where we do.
So,
part of the answer to that is, in fact, political system. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what's the best way to reduce poverty, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, it depends on, the short version, give me a labor market generating enough jobs at sufficient wages that it can support a family. Give me a means for those families, particularly at the lower end, to have access to safe and affordable childcare. Ensure that all of those families are not bankrupted from out-of-pocket medical expenditures. You do those three things, and we probably cut poverty in half. from where it is right now.
Well, we probably grew up at around the same time. I probably have a few years on you, I think. And, for a large part of my childhood, my mother actually didn't have to work, got to stay home and raise me. In this day and age, that isn't possible for most people, is it?
Can't afford to. No, you can't live on a single income.
Right. And why is that?
Well, it's complicated. Part of that is declining wages. Part of the decline in wages is decline in union power, right? Part of why we had those kinds of jobs in the 50s and 60s is that you look at the automobile industry, right? You walk out of high school, you walk down the road, you walk into the GM plant, you got a good job, you can raise a family, you can buy a house, you can send kids to school, right? That's the peak of American union power. There's some leverage, there was some pushback, there were defined benefit retirement plans, there were good access to health insurance for those jobs. We don't have those jobs anymore, right? You walk out into the labor market today with only a high school degree and you're screwed, right? There are no kinds of opportunities. You can barely support yourself, let alone a family. Now, that's a complicated set of causes that led us to that, right? I mean, that's global changes in the economy, global changes in manufacturing, that's offshoring of certain kinds of production, right? That's a many-faceted puzzle. But that's a labor market difference, among other things, and the failure of workers to be able to push back.
Actually, it's simpler than you think. We can trace back the real decline in American wages and standard of living to the mid-1970s, and there was a seminal event that occurred in 1971 that kind of tripped it all off, that really isn't taught much in school, kind of irrelevant, and it goes back to the 60s, Vietnam, the Great Society, all these things, but really the thing that triggered it, and we don't really have much time to debate it, so being a little bit unfair, but as a monetarist, gold bug, etc., closing of the gold window.
Oh my God!
You can trace all your inflation.
Going off the gold standard is your answer?
I'd say that what it did was it unleashed a period of inflation and really led to the breakdown of the family and a lot of other nasty things, unleashed a lot of forces in society, led to, the oil embargoes, declining of the purchasing power of the dollar, a lot of things. I'm not saying that going off the gold standard was the cause of it, because,
Well, you actually just did, but okay.
What I'm saying is that the debasing of the monetary system led to the basically the decline of the standard of living of the average worker. What it comes down to, you can go down.
Macroeconomics 101 will tell you that just doesn't hold up to scrutiny as an explanation.
Yeah, well, Keynesian economics tells you that you can increase people's standards of living and increase the wealth of society by having the government pay everybody money, increase your minimum wage to $15, $25 an hour, everyone will be happy. But in reality, what you wind up with is an economic collapse like what we saw in 2008 and what we're going to see shortly. In any event, we could go on debating, and I would enjoy a return discussion on the Financial Survival Network. Tell us where to find your book. Tell us where we read your work on your website. It's really been great having
find
you on.
Book, all the usual suspects. Google me or go to Amazon. You can find my books. Probably the easiest way to follow me on a regular basis is at Stephen Pimpare on Twitter.com.
All right, spell your name so we can find you.
StephenPimpare.
And I appreciate the debate. We don't get emotional. We don't throw stones. We actually talk facts, and that's a good thing. That's what advances the human condition and makes people think. And anything that makes people think, Stephen and I know, is a good thing. So, FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. I hope you will come back on again and we can discuss these matters. I give you a little bit more time and we can really get into it, okay?
Great. Thank you, Kerry.
Hey, thanks. Been a pleasure. I know we've got a lot of you out there who are coffee fiends just like me. You couldn't go one day without your Java. But here's my question. Why do you drink so much marginal coffee? That watery stuff you get in some places? There's another life, friends, where coffee is good, right, and true. Our friends at Tonks buy your beans directly from the growers, roast it to absolute perfection, and ship it to you within 24 hours. It's a bi-weekly subscription which sends the best beans on earth directly to your doorstep for the price of just a few cafe visits. They'd love to send you a free sample so you can see what you've been missing out on. Use the URL tonks.org/liberty. That's tonx.org/liberty. They'll send you a free sample, and I'll tell you, once you've tasted their coffee, there's no going back.
The Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.